property! You don't belong here!
Get off that porch! You don't live here! The scream cut through the quiet suburban street like a knife. Jamal Williams froze with his house keys still in his hand. He'd just come home from work, his tie loosened, his jacket slung over his shoulder when the sound hit him. He turned slowly, confused, only to find his neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, the woman from next door, marching across her lawn like a storm, her finger jabbing the air at him. "You heard me," she barked, her blonde hair whipping in the breeze. "This isn't your house. Put those keys down before I call the police." Jamal blinked. For a second, he thought she had to be joking. He'd lived here for 6 months now, paid every mortgage bill, painted the porch himself last weekend. His name was on the deed, signed and notarized. "This is my home," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I have the deed. I've lived here since March." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Don't lie to me. I know who belongs here and who doesn't, and it sure isn't you." Her voice rose so loud that blinds shifted in nearby windows. Curious faces peeked out. One by one, neighbors began stepping onto their porches, the quiet evening turning into a stage. A couple across the street lifted their phones, recording. Jamal's jaw clenched. He could already feel the heat building in his chest, the sting of being accused of trespassing on his own property. But before he could answer, Mrs. Dalton whipped out her phone and dialed 3 numbers. "Hello? Yes, police?" Your eyes never left his. "There's a man trying to break into a house on Maple Drive. He's pretending it's his. Yes, I'm sure he doesn't live here." Jamal exhaled slowly, gripping his keys tighter. He knew what this was. He'd heard the stories, seen the videos online, neighbors calling the cops for no reason, accusations twisted by prejudice. Now it was happening to him. "You just made a big mistake," he said quietly. Her smirk widened. "We'll see." Minutes later, the red and blue glow washed over the street. A police cruiser rolled up, doors opening in unison. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other younger, his hand hovering near his radio. The air grew heavy. "That's him!" Mrs. Dalton shrieked, pointing wildly at Jamal. "He's breaking in! Arrest him!" Phones rose higher. Neighbors leaned closer. The entire block held its breath. And Jamal, standing tall on the porch he'd worked so hard to buy, slipped his hand into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon, not for his wallet, but for the folder he always carried, the one that held the truth of his home. The deed. The flashing lights painted the street in red and blue, bouncing off the white picket fences and shiny SUVs parked in driveways. Kids who had been riding bikes a few houses down stopped cold, their handlebars glowing with police light. The quiet suburb wasn't quiet anymore. The taller officer, Sergeant Miller, strode forward, his boots heavy against the pavement. His partner, Officer Kent, stayed a step behind, one hand brushing the radio on his chest. Mrs. Dalton wasted no time. She rushed toward them, pointing wildly back at Jamal. "That's him!" she cried, her voice shrill. "He's trying to break in! He doesn't live there! I've lived on this street for 20 years. I know every homeowner, and he's not one of them." Her words rolled like thunder. Heads turned, phones lifted higher. A dozen neighbors now stood on their lawns recording, whispering. Some looked skeptical. Others looked uneasy. Sergeant Miller lifted a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. We'll handle it." He turned his gaze to Jamal, who still stood tall on his porch, keys in one hand, his jacket folded over his arm. "Sir, can you step down here and explain what's going on?" Jamal inhaled sharply, the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. He could feel every camera lens trained on him, every whisper slicing the air. If he stepped down, it would look like submission. If he didn't, it could be seen as defiance. "This is my house," he said, his voice steady but strong enough to carry. "I live here. My name is Jamal Williams. I bought this house in March. I have the deed." Mrs. Dalton barked a laugh, ugly and triumphant. "Lies! Look at him! Do you really think he owns a home like this? He's trespassing, and he probably broke the lock before I saw him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman across the street muttered, "She really said that?" Phones zoomed closer, capturing every word. Officer Kent cleared his throat. "Sir, we just need to verify. Can you show us some ID, maybe proof of residence?" "I said I have the deed," Jamal repeated, lifting the folder slightly from under his jacket. "It's right here. I'll show you." Mrs. Dalton stepped forward, nearly hysterical now. "Don't believe him. He could have forged that. He's lying, I swear it. I've lived next door for years. I know the Smiths sold this house, but not to him." Her voice cracked with desperation. Her certainty so sharp minutes ago now sounded like it was fraying. Sergeant Miller raised a brow. "Ma'am, if he has a deed, that's legal proof." "No, no, you don't understand," she snapped, her hands flailing. "These people always—" She cut herself short, but it was too late. The phones had caught it. The crowd had heard it. A low murmur rolled through the street like a wave. Jamal's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. He unzipped the folder slowly, deliberately, like a magician about to reveal his final trick. Inside was the thick paper document he carried not out of paranoia, but out of habit, because he knew, deep down, something like this might happen one day. He pulled it free, the gold notary stamp catching the glare of the police lights. He held it high, steady, letting everyone see. "This is the deed to my home," he said firmly. "Signed by the county clerk. Recorded with the state. Jamal A. Williams, owner of 184 Maple Drive." Silence. The kind of silence that crushes air out of lungs. Even the police radios crackled more softly, as if the night itself paused to watch. Mrs. Dalton froze, her mouth hanging open, her face drained of color as she stared at the paper. "No, no, that can't be real. He's lying. He's... Sergeant Miller stepped forward, taking the document carefully from Jamal's hand. He angled it under the patrol car lights, scanning line by line. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked up at Jamal, then over to Dalton. "It's real," he said simply. "This man owns this house." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, murmurs. Phones zoomed in closer. A woman's voice rang out, "We got it on video." Another man added, "It's all live. The whole internet's gonna see this." Mrs. Dalton's face twisted, fury mixing with panic. She stepped back, shaking her head, as if denial could erase the ink on the page. "This is a mistake," she shrieked. "You're all blind. He doesn't belong here. He doesn't—" Enough! Sergeant Miller's voice boomed like thunder, silencing the street. "You called us under false pretenses. You wasted emergency resources, and you publicly harassed a lawful homeowner." The words hit harder than any fist. Mrs. Dalton stumbled, her eyes darting around, realizing that every neighbor, every phone, every witness had just seen her stripped bare. And Jamal, standing on his porch, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, finally felt the weight begin to lift. But it wasn't over yet. Not yet.
Mrs. Dalton's voice cracked as she kept shouting, though her words no longer carried the same weight. "He doesn't belong here! You're making a mistake! You'll regret this!" But nobody was listening anymore. Not the neighbors, not the crowd that had gathered, not even the officers who had come at her call. All eyes were on Jamal, the man who stood tall on the porch he had worked his whole life to afford, the man who had just proved beyond any shadow of doubt that the home was his. The taller officer, Sergeant Miller, held the deed high. "This document is legal, notarized, and binding. Jamal Williams is the rightful owner of 184 Maple Drive." He handed the papers back with a firm nod. Sir, I apologize for the disruption tonight. Jamal took the deed carefully, his fingers steady even though his chest still hammered like a drum. He slid it back into its folder, tucking it under his arm like armor. Around him, the crowd murmured with approval. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "Can't believe she tried that." A young woman near the curb whispered to her friend, "He handled it like a king." Phones hovered in the air, capturing it all. Mrs. Dalton was shaking now, her face twisted in panic. "You can't just let him. He's dangerous. Sergeant Miller turned, his patience gone. "Ma'am, that's enough. You've made false accusations, wasted police resources, and disturbed the peace of this neighborhood. Do you realize what you've done?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was just trying to protect." "Protect who? From what? A man unlocking his own front door? You've embarrassed yourself. And worse, you've endangered an innocent person with your reckless call." A ripple of applause broke from the crowd. It started with one neighbor, then another, until half the block was clapping, the sound echoing against the houses. The glow of phones captured every angle, the furious neighbors shrinking, the calm homeowner standing tall, and the officers shifting uncomfortably in the center of it all. Jamal finally spoke, his voice deep and clear. "You tried to take my dignity tonight. You tried to turn my own home into a crime scene. But the truth doesn't bend to your lies, and now the whole neighborhood knows it." Mrs. Dalton's face crumpled. She sank down onto the curb, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The woman who had called the cops with such righteous fury was now the picture of defeat. Jamal turned toward the officers. "Am I free to go into my house now?" "Of course, sir," Miller said quietly. He gave a small nod of respect, a gesture that spoke volumes. Jamal stepped up the porch, sliding the key into the lock with deliberate calm. The door opened smoothly, welcoming him inside. But before he crossed the threshold, he turned back to face the street. Neighbors watched with admiration, some even smiling, others nodding in quiet solidarity. A mother holding her child whispered loud enough for the cameras, "That man belongs here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jamal raised the deed one last time, holding it high so everyone, including the phone still recording, could see it. "This house is mine. This street is mine too, and no one can take that away." Cheers rippled through the crowd. The sound of clapping hands rolled down Maple Drive, stronger than sirens, louder than lies. Jamal stepped inside, the door closing softly behind him. The camera stayed outside. The whispers lingered. Mrs. Dalton remained on the curb, her head low. Her empire of prejudice crumbled in the space of one evening. And Jamal, inside the walls he had fought to own, finally breathed. The air tasted different now, freer, stronger, like dignity reclaimed. Because he hadn't just defended his house, he had defended his place in the world.